Hello, Bolo Foundation and friends. My name is Chelsea Wisner. I'm the Director of Land Protection for Conservation Florida. Today I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about how we're influencing statewide land conservation for a more connected future. Before we jump in, I wanted to share my contact information in case there's anything today that really excites you and you want to get in touch with me directly to talk about it more. So Conservation Florida is a nonprofit land conservancy, and we've been working all across the state since 1999 to protect our water, wildlife, and wild places. In our 25 years, we have conserved more than 40,000 acres. And if you're wondering how much land that is, that's nearly 3 whole Manhattan islands. And we do this, of course, to preserve the places that make Florida so special and that make it home to us and all of the plants and animals that we share this wonderful state with. We do this in so many ways. Namely, we save land by facilitating, purchasing, or accepting donations of land and conservation easements. Moreover, we serve as a trusted community partner in order to support statewide land conservation, either in our own work or with our partner organizations, and also advocating and educating and performing outreach activities for the sake of conservation in Florida. So first, I want to jump into our land protection work, and I've already used a buzzword that you might be wanting to know more about. So what exactly is a conservation easement? In the simplest of terms, it is the separation of development rights from a physical piece of land. This serves to limit future land use and aims to protect a property's conservation values. For Conservation Florida, we only work in forever. All of our easements are meant to stand the test of time and are meant to complement a particular property's conservation values. Of course, no two properties are the same, so conservation values between all these properties is very different. What might be the benefit of preserving a cattle ranch is very different than what the benefit of preserving forested wetlands are. And so being able to hold our own easements, tailor those terms to each particular land makes it very powerful to do lots of different types of conservation. So who exactly can hold a conservation easement? This kind of boils down to two groups. Of course, land trusts like Conservation Florida, otherwise called land conservancies, and government agencies. And so typically, especially with government agencies, they have different goals for their programs. For example, Florida Forever in our state aims to protect our wildlands, right? Natural, big spanning areas. Whereas the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is looking to preserve food and fiber and working lands for future generations. In addition to our state, the federal government and local level governments can also hold conservation easements, as well as our water management districts, and they hold a large share of the easements in our state. But the work of the land trusts is just as significant, and all of these programs are meant to complement one another in order to achieve the most conservation possible. The power of conservation easements is that they allow us an opportunity to preserve working lands. What I'm going to call traditional conservation lands, things like state parks and wildlife management areas. You know, not every land can be a state park. Protecting different properties through conservation easements allows the opportunity to support our agricultural community and heritage and our economy. We need land that we can cultivate so that we can feed not just Floridians, but people all across the United States and maybe even across the world. Additionally, when we're acquiring conservation easement, since we're not acquiring the entire property, just the development rights, that perpetual management responsibility remains with the landowner. And when we're thinking about, the burden of land management, it's forever, especially in Florida. Our ecosystems are very dependent on management, things like prescribed fire, invasive species management. These things are expensive. And the more that county governments and state governments hold, the higher that bill gets. So in order to conserve conservation lands in a variety of ways allows us to share that burden. And so in the case of conservation easements, that stays with the landowner. That being said, landowners can change over time with conservation easements. These are recorded with the deed of a property and they are transferable and permanent. So if a agriculturalist puts a conservation easement on their land, they can not worry about being able to pass that down to their kids in the future. They're totally able to do that, but the terms of the conservation easement remain the same. Another benefit to conservation easements is since we're not acquiring the whole property, just the development rights, It only costs about half of what that traditional land conservation costs. And so you're able to do 2 times the amount of impact with the same amount of money. And of course, conservation lands, whether they're that traditional fee simple type when they turn into state parks and public accessible lands, or through conservation easements, are all working toward this goal of a connected conservation corridor throughout our state. And that is, of course, to support healthy populations of native plants and wildlife and to provide people places to connect with nature. Florida is lucky to have these sprawling greenways and trails programs that take you across several different conservation lands. We can only do that if they're connected. Of course, that being said, tourism is a huge part of our economy. So is agriculture. So preserving these lands contributes to a strong economy and supports the success of our working family farms and ranches. And what we all enjoy, whether you get outside or if you don't, is that when you turn on the tap, fresh, clean water comes out. We can only do that if our aquifer has places to recharge and our water has places to improve its quality. In addition to preserving open land that allows water to replenish the aquifer, it also provides places that water can stay after things like storm events, hurricanes, so that it doesn't flood our homes, which is important to all of us. I'm going to turn it over to a couple cowboys to tell you about why conservation easements are so powerful and what they mean to them.
My family came here early 1800s. They've been here roughly 200 years. The sense of responsibility to the land was handed down over the generations. My name is Matt Pierce. I'm owner of Pierce Cattle Company in Okeechobee, Florida. We're going to lose wild Florida if we don't have these ranches.
Our ranch lands in our state are some of the last vast green landscapes that we have. And most people don't know that cattle ranching actually began in Florida. So this is such a deep part of our state's history.
My name is Pat Durden, president of the Florida Cattlemen's Association. Today's rancher has far more concerns than just their cow herd. The relationship between Conservation Florida and the Florida Cattlemen's Association is important because it's allowed us to get outside of our own bubbles on the ranch and interact with people that we find common ground with about preserving Florida's land. Conservation is important to me because I really do believe that it is the only way we're going to sustain Florida's heritage, our food industry, and protect our natural resources, our wildlife, our waterways. There's no other way to do it without utilizing conservation easements.
I mean, we provide such a habitat for wildlife, endangered species like gopher tortoises, panthers, caracara, the indigo, bald eagles. A lot of creatures live out here. Everybody gets to benefit from us working the land. We're holding water on this ranch, which is an aquifer recharge. And then, with the grasslands, we've got carbon sequestration. We're trying to be resilient with the land. When we go home at night, you want to have left it better than you found it.
I think the real success is that we've kind of shown some of our ranchers that there is an avenue for them to go down through conservation easements and continue to ranch and continue to pass that land on to the next generation and be able to do that in a way that's going to be sustained in perpetuity forever for all Floridians.
Something you may have heard about before is a geospatial model called the Florida Wildlife Corridor. This is a data set that aims to connect our conserved lands through other corridors that have the potential to be conserved to create a connected landscape. When we look at what I keep calling these traditional conservation lands, right, publicly accessible wildlife management areas, state parks, we see that maybe we're only about halfway to achieving that goal. But when we overlay the conservation easements that currently also exist in our state, we see that we're a lot closer to seeing that through to fruition. So again, not every piece of property can be conserved in the same way. So this diversity of options to conserve different types of land is essential to seeing this connected landscape through to fruition. There are parts of Florida that aren't really appropriate, or just the culture isn't there to turn something into a publicly accessible property. You know, I'm thinking especially around the Peace River in the Southern Peninsula. This is a deeply agricultural area. These families want to conserve that land for themselves and their family to work cows for forever, right? And so that's not something that could be turned into a state park. That's something that they want to maintain in their own ownership. Conservation easements allow us to both achieve that mutual conservation goal and allow different types of conservation to happen. I'm going to let you see some more experts talk about the value of that.
In the beginning, Florida was one big wildlife corridor. Animals could freely move from the Atlantic to the Gulf, from the Keys. If you step back and see how Florida is, or almost any of our developed area now, it's crisscrossed by roads, interstate highways, fences. All of these are barriers to wildlife.
In 2015, a Florida black bear demonstrated the importance of connected land.
M34 was a young male bear that changed our view of the landscape, if you will. M34 was kind of an afterthought when we first caught him because he was small. But then 6 months later, without warning, M34's track just launches off in these long, straight runs. This huge kind of epic adventure ensued. It was stunning to see how easily he moved through the landscape, bypassing obstacles, avoiding conflicts, and surviving. In front of our eyes, we were able to see, yes, in fact, animals can navigate through this landscape.
So we talk about a connected landscape of conservation lands. It is for the sake of large ranging terrestrial mammals like bears and panthers so that they can fulfill their natural histories, right? They can find other bears and panthers to make more with and continue their own families into future generations. I've insinuated that really no two pieces of property are the same, and that means that there's a lot of power and partnership to make conservation happen. I believe our success is deeply intertwined with the partnerships that we have because it allows us the maximum flexibility to match each landowner with the program that's best for them. So whether we're working with a county partner, a federal partner, or a state partner, or maybe even sometimes other non-government organizations. We depend so deeply on these partnerships to make good conservation happen. And really, we can't do any of that without our donors and our landowners as well. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of projects that we've closed recently that I'm very excited about. The first of which is called AP Ranch. This is about 1,000 acres in Highlands County, so we're looking at the Southern Peninsula again. And you can see on the map there in the center that this property is an end cap to already pretty conserved conservation corridor, which is where so much power lies in doing additional conservation. And that's because aside from the owl and the deer that you see on screen here, this landowner has captured countless bears, and they've even captured panthers on game cameras. So we can say that these things are valuable to the animals, but of course, seeing it on camera totally changes that. We know that this is valuable to these animals so that they can move across the landscape and do the things that they need to do. And this is a working cattle ranch, and now will always be one. The next project I want to introduce you to is our Inner Island Conservation Easement. This is protecting about 100 acres of land. It's our first coastal easement out in Escambia County, so from the beach that you see here, you're actually looking right at Alabama, which is super neat. We mean it when we say that we work statewide from Pensacola to the Keys. This easement protects pine flatwoods, it protects coastal marsh, and of course, beaches. Bellini Preserve is a really exciting kind of novel approach to conservation. We did this in partnership with Polk County. It was an acquisition with Polk County, a private landowner, and the Department of Defense, and we all came together and played different roles in the acquisition of what is now a public preserve. And so Bellini Preserve is publicly accessible. It's managed by the Polk County Parks and Natural Resources Division, but we, Conservation Florida, also hold a conservation easement over the property. So there is that double level of protection to know that this is always going to be publicly accessible. It's always going to be natural lands for passive recreation. And finally, one that I could say I'm excited about all of our projects because it's very sincerely true. Now we've shot all the way down to Collier County in Southwest Florida, where we acquired about 62 acres of inholdings within the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park. And, we talk about connected landscapes. Inholdings can sometimes pose a risk where if someone were to build a house, right, that's going to then complicate the long-term management of these places. So acquiring inholdings and combining them with the state park that surround it safeguard these investments that we've made as taxpayers. Our team was lucky enough while we were out there documenting the site to even run into a very healthy panther on the site. And, especially with all of the vehicle collisions that those cats are facing and other issues affecting their health, it warms our hearts to know that we were able to contribute to saving their home. And our work is far from over. The blue dots that you see are the places that we've been, and the yellow dots are the places that we are going. And something that keeps us going is that there's demand for our work on the landscape. We can work 40 hours a week, all hands on deck, and there's always more demand for land conservation work. And we love that about our Floridian neighbors. Another way that we are impacting statewide land conservation is through our advocacy work. Through strategic partnerships, advocacy efforts, and unwavering dedication, our organization continues to make profound impacts in Tallahassee. We're working collaboratively with policymakers, fellow conservation organizations, and of course the public to secure a greener future. It takes quite a bit of money in order to conserve the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And so we routinely go up to Tallahassee and support for funding to be allocated to the Florida Forever and Rural and Family Lands Protection Programs. These are our state's premier easement acquisition programs, with Florida Forever additionally working to preserve those traditional conservation lands that I keep talking about. And then, of course, advocating for the integrity of our conservation lands. It's one thing to protect something once, but it's another thing to protect them forever. So we ensure also that those lands are being taken care of the way that we all would like them to. And if you've lived in Florida for any amount of time, you can probably guess why this is so important. In 2010, the amount of land that we had paved looks a lot different than it does today. And if we keep going at the rate that we are, by 2070, we'll have paved over a lot more of that. But it doesn't have to be that way. With policy and good funding to these acquisition programs, we can see a greener future through to fruition, and one that sees this corridor vision through to reality. In addition to land protection and advocacy, we also do a whole bunch of education and outreach, and this is meeting the communities where they are. So we host community events like Eco Trivia and Conservation on Tap, which sometimes even has special guests like that shown here, and really so many more. We also host volunteer days at our D Ranch Nature Preserve in Volusia County on the East Coast, and elsewhere throughout the state. I can say that our volunteer demand is only growing, and there are always opportunities to join our conservation crew and support our mission if you're ready to get your hands dirty. We also host an annual 5K that helps support our core mission. And I'm very excited to share with you that we're building a nature center for conservation community out at D Ranch Preserve. This is going to become our home for sharing our mission and connecting Floridians with nature. We continue to host more and more seasonal environmental education events on site, and the development of our nature center is only going to revolutionize the capacity at which, the capacity at which we're going to be able to share that mission with you all. So you might be wondering, or at least I hope that you are, how you can help with our mission. Again, we are all across the state from Tallahassee and in your backyard. You've seen the points on the map. Our work is far from over. And we really need your help to make that dream of a connected reality, one that we all share.
The connected, thriving corridor that once was is being fragmented, and it's affecting, everything. Our water, our wildlife, even our quality of life rely on these connected lands. But it's never too late. We can keep these pieces of paradise.
It could be a beautiful future if we all rally behind saving what keeps Florida, Florida.
I see so much hope in so many places. The rancher, the farmer, the biologist, the lawmaker who votes to protect the corridor. And they're the reason we have this chance to save this for the next generation.
There's over 8 million acres of the Florida Wildlife Corridor to protect. And, we're not going to get them all, that's reality. But we're going to protect that corridor 1 acre at a time.
It's going to take conservationists, politicians, storytellers, scientists, and us voicing a demand to protect our land. Because if the corridor can't be saved, we'll have to ask ourselves, what can be saved?
If you would like to find out more about our mission and how you can get involved, I please ask that you join us over at conservationfla.org and especially check out the What You Can Do tab. We are always fundraising and putting out the call for volunteer assistance, and this is really the best resource to stay up to date with our organization. At the very bottom of that tab, you'll see Keep in Touch. And if you join our mailing list, you will stay up to date with the latest of the events in your area and our recent land conservation successes. I also would implore you that if you are a Floridian, you have the power to influence this through your vote. And if it touches your heart, keep that in mind when voting season rolls around. And finally, you've seen a little bit of it today, but if you'd like to see more of our 6-part Emmy Award-winning series, Protect Our Paradise, you can find that over at discoverfloridachannel.com or on YouTube. Thank you so much.